A moment frozen in time. A terror that for one spring gripped a small town on the border of Texas and Arkansas. Survivors and investigators died years ago, some from illness and some peacefully in their beds. But the story and what they went through in the spring of 1946 never died with them. It lives on. The case of the Phantom Killer is filled with myths. Many originated from the 1976 slasher movie Town That Dreaded Sundown. A movie that claimed everything that was told was the true story, but so much of it wasn't. So come on this journey with me as we explore the true story of the Texarkana Moonlight murders. James McHollis, a 25-year-old insurance agent, was at the movies on a double date with his brother. James had brought Mary Jean Larry with him. Mary was his girlfriend, a 19-year-old that at the time was living in Texas. After the movie, as James was driving Mary home, they decided to instead go to a lover's lane. The lover's lane sat on a secluded and unpaved road about 100 yards from the nearest house. The couple had arrived at the lover's lane at about 11:45 p.m. and had only gotten 10 minutes of foreplay before someone appeared by their car. The stranger had a flashlight he was shining into the couple's eyes, blinding them. They could see that he was tall and that he seemed to wear a white pillowcase over his head with the eyes cut out. James didn't think the man was being serious and told him that he had the wrong guy, thinking it was a prank aimed at someone else. But it wasn't a prank, and it certainly wasn't aimed at someone else, which was proven when the masked man pulled out a gun and pointed it at James, and then ordered the couple to step out of the car, ensuring James that he didn't want to have to kill him. The couple, now terrified, stepped out of the car and stood in front of the tall man, who was still holding the flashlight pointed at them, as well as holding the gun tightly in his other hand. The man ordered James to, quote, "Take off your goddamn breeches," a demand that made James hesitate. Why would this stranger want him to take his pants off? But his girlfriend Mary insisted that they do as the masked stranger says. So James unbuckled his belt and stripped down, and while his pants were off down by his ankles, the masked man stepped forward and smashed him in the head with the gun twice. The two hits were so strong that Mary at first thought the masked man had shot James, but would later find out the loud booms were actually from James being struck in the head, and they were severe fucking strikes too. James' skull had been fractured and cracked. He would spend several days after the event in a hospital recovering from the severe head trauma. Now Mary was afraid, and she began begging and pleading with the masked man. Thinking he was there to rob them, she tried to tell the man that neither she nor James had their wallets, and she even went through James' pants to prove it. But the masked man simply called her a liar and then struck her in the head as well. This time it's unsure whether she was struck with the gun or the flashlight, but struck she was, and she fell to the ground. Mary managed to get up pretty quickly and stood there in front of the man, shocked, in pain, and fearing for her life. The man just looked at her and then told her to run. Mary started running towards a ditch, but the man told her she needed to run in the opposite direction, towards the road. He wanted her to flee in the open field, so that he could see her, hunt her, prey on her. Mary ran with all the might she had, and she could see a car up on the road ahead. At this point she was praying that someone was in the car, that someone could help her, but as she reached it, she could see that it was empty. This is when the masked man all of a sudden came over her. He had been following her and chasing her, and he now pointed his gun at her. demanding to know why she had run from him. She responded that he had told her to run, and the man called her a liar and pushed her down on the ground. While on the ground, laying on top of her, the man took the barrel of his gun and shoved it into her vagina, using the gun to penetrate the frightened 19-year-old girl. After a little while, the masked man was scared off by passing headlights and decided that it was time to leave the scene, leaving Mary on the ground, shocked and confused. She rose to her feet and tried to flag down a vehicle, but the driver wouldn't stop to help. Eventually, she made her way to the houses nearby and managed to talk to a resident who agreed to call the police. While Mary had been getting assaulted by the masked man, James had woken up. Dazed and afraid, he looked around but couldn't see any trace of either the masked man or his girlfriend Mary. He too made his way to the road and managed to flag down a vehicle. After some talking, the driver agreed to help James and drove off to a nearby funeral home where he could call the police, leaving James to wait by the side of the road. The police arrived at the scene, but they had no idea what had just happened, and it didn't help that Mary and James gave conflicting reports of the ethnicity of the attacker. Mary claimed he was a light-skinned black guy, while James claimed he was a dark-skinned white guy. The police were sure it was a personal attack, someone who held a grudge against the couple, or someone who was in love with Mary. They were wrong. Really fucking wrong. Because this wasn't some love drama and crime of passion. This was the rise of a man who would forever be known as the Phantom Killer. Polly Ann Moore, a sweet 17-year-old girl who preferred to stay at home instead of going out with boys. But in March of 1946, she was dating Richard Lanier Griffin. Richard was a 29-year-old war veteran who was working as a carpenter and as a painter. He was still living at home with his mother in a service court built for veterans who had returned from World War II. On March 23rd, the couple had been dating for 6 weeks, and this was the last day, the last time ever, they were seen alive. On the morning of March 24th, between about 8 and 9 a.m., a guy driving his motorcycle down Ridge Road spotted a secluded vehicle in a popular Lover's Lane area. A gravel road stop surrounded by trees, something that offered a great deal of privacy for horny couples. The motorcycle guy drove closer to the vehicle and stepped off his motorcycle to have a peek inside. He saw what he thought was 2 people sleeping, but something just didn't look right. They looked dead. The man was crouched down between the passenger and driver's seats, resting his head against his crossed arms. He also seemed to have his pockets turned inside out, and in the back seat a young woman was laying face down and sprawled out, and she also seemed to have her pockets turned inside out. Confused, the motorcycle guy looked around in the car a little bit more, and that's when he spotted blood inside the couple's car. In other words, it was time to call the police. Just like with Mary and James, this attack had occurred on the Texas side of the border, which is important to note because that meant that the Bowie County Sheriff's Department handled the crime scene. The murder was simple. Both Polly and Richard had been shot in the back of the head execution style, but they had been killed outside the car as a patch of bloody soil was spotted by investigators. So they had been forced out of the car, and no one but the killer knows what psychological terror they were subjected to before being executed. Shot down point blank in the back of the head. And then the Phantom carried them back into the car to be positioned the way they were found. One promising lead, footprints in the mud, were washed away by rainstorms. This murder really got people going. Rumors, fear and uncertainty was spreading. Add to that 200 people have been questioned by police, but not a single one were suspected or charged with anything. On March 27th, the Texarkana Gazette published an article in hopes of helping police do their job, and the article reads as follows. Sheriff Bill Presley and his deputies have a difficult task ahead of them as they attempt to solve the shocking double murder discovered Sunday morning. Texarkana residents can help in this investigation, and at the same time, if they are not careful, they can hinder the investigation and cause the officers to spend many hours following blind trails. Persons who have information which might furnish a clue to the identity of the slayer or slayers, or which might indicate a motive for the crime, should not divulge such information on street corners or at cold drink stands, but should immediately make it available to the officers. Do not spread rumors regardless of how many bases for the fact there is in them. Do not say "I heard" or "they say," because the chances are that the person listening will repeat your information and enlarge upon it. Before long, the story grows to such proportions as to necessitate a detailed investigation by the officers, thereby perhaps pulling them off the true trail and sending them up a blind alley. Stick to facts that you know of your own personal knowledge and relay those facts as quickly as possible to the officers. The population of Texarkana was growing more concerned every day the killer was on the loose, preying on young couples. Vigilante groups started patrolling secluded roads looking for signs of shady things, and soon the town would erupt in pure panic. Paul Martin, a 16-year-old high school junior who helped his family work in their ice plants. He was described as a quiet kid by his brother, and he was a faithful member of the Beach Street Baptist Church, which was the same church his childhood friend Betty Jo Booker went to. Paul had known Betty since they went to kindergarten together, and they both grew up on the Arkansas side of the border. Betty had moved to the Texas side, so the two friends was only able to see each other at church. In 1946, Betty was 15 years old, and she had just finished a gig in her orchestra on Sunday, April 14th. She was going to head to a slumber party, and her 1-year older friend Paul was going to drive her. As she left the building to get into Paul Martin's car, no one knew that it was going to be the last time they would see Betty alive. 2 days later, all her friends, classmates, and band members would instead attend her funeral. On their way to the slumber party Betty was going to, the two friends had decided to stop at a lover's lane. Their young lust would lead them into the mouth of hell. About 5 hours had gone since Paul and Betty had left the music club. It was now 6:30 a.m. and a couple were out walking with their child. As they strolled along the road, they came across a body laying by the side of it. The body was Paul Martin. He had been murdered, shot several times, and left on the side of the road like a piece of trash. On the other side of the road, another smatter of blood could be spotted, and the couple contacted police. Sheriff Bill Presley and other officers arrived at the scene of the crime. They had managed to piece together that Paul Martin had been with Betty Jo Booker, but she wasn't anywhere in the area. So a search for Betty was launched. About 5 hours after Paul Martin had been found, the body of Betty Jo Booker was found. She was laying beside a tree on her back. Just like Paul, she had also been shot more than once. Strangely enough, her body appeared to have been posed, as her hand had been tucked into her coat pocket, and the coat had been buttoned up all the way. Now the city of Texarkana was about to go into full-blown panic. Someone was targeting the young couples parked on lovers' lanes, and 4 lives had now been taken by the same maniac. The bodies were brought in for examination, and it showed that Paul Martin had been shot 4 times. 1 bullet had gone straight through his nose, 1 had gone through his left ribs, and it appeared to have gone in from behind. He had another bullet stuck in his hand, and the 4th and final bullet had exited through the back of his neck. Betty Jo had been shot 2 times, once in the chest and once directly in her face. sounds to me like the Phantom was a very angry man. Angry at young love and lust. Paul and Betty had put up a fight against their attacker, but they ultimately lost. The car the couple had been driving was found 1.5 miles from Paul's body and 3 miles from Betty's body, the key still in the ignition. On April 16th, the funeral was held. Teenagers who had known the victims was lined up. Betty's mother couldn't control her grief as she looked at all the classmates and friends of her daughter pass by Betty's casket, paying their respects. The ceremonies for both was held in the Beach Street Baptist Church, the same church both Betty and Paul had grown up attending together. Betty's saxophone would be found still in its case 6 months later, and her band named the Eurythmics would never play another gig again, out of respect for Betty Jo and the life that had been taken from her. A Texas Ranger with a flair for drama was brought into the case, and it is evident now that he probably wasn't the best fit for this case. He wouldn't do any real police work, but would still take the credit from others. He would often appear in the newspapers, and came off as a bit of a fame seeker. It was also after this attack that the nickname Phantom Killer was first coined. And you know what they say. Thus, a legend had been born. Walter Virgil Starks was a 37-year-old man, and he had been living with his wife Catherine in his modern ranch home on his 500-acre farm for 5 years. The house was located 10 miles northeast of Texarkana, and he lived not far away from his brother and father. Virgil had married Catherine when they were both 22 years old. And around 9 p.m. on May 3rd, 1946, the couple was unwinding in their home, like they had done so many nights before. Virgil turned on the radio and sat down in his favorite chair, 3 feet from the window facing the highway. He began reading the day's edition of the local newspaper, Texarkana Gazette. His wife Catherine slipped into her nightgown and crawled into bed. Catherine couldn't fall asleep. She thought she could hear noises coming from the yard. She asked Virgil if he could turn the volume down on the radio, and as he stood up to turn the volume down, she could hear glass breaking. Catherine rushed out of the bedroom and could see Virgil standing still for a second, before aimlessly falling back into his chair. Virgil's face was full of blood, and she could tell he had been shot, although she couldn't tell how many times, or what had even happened. But he had died instantly. What Catherine at this time wasn't aware of was that the Phantom Killer was still standing on the other side of the window, just behind Virgil's favorite chair. The Phantom was standing out on the porch looking into the house, waiting for a perfect moment to shoot Catherine as well. Catherine's first reaction is to try and save her husband, something she realizes pretty quickly won't be an option. Instead, Catherine rushes up to the phone to call the police, but she doesn't manage to make the phone call before the Phantom fires again from the same window. The same window where he had been lurking, waiting for this moment. Catherine first gets hit in her right cheek, and the bullet exits just behind her left ear. The second bullet hits her below her lip, and as it lodges itself underneath her tongue, it breaks her jaw and splinters several of her teeth. The pain shoots through Catherine as she drops to her knees beneath the telephone. She is flooded with fear, but she is also determined. She is determined to survive. The pain Catherine is feeling in her face is intense as fuck, but she knows it's live or die at this moment. She starts crawling towards the bedroom, where she stops to collect her thoughts. There she realizes she needs to get Virgil's gun. She knows where it is, and it might be the only thing that can save her if the Phantom breaks his way in. She pushes herself up to her feet, a real tough lady, and starts to stumble her way into the living room. But as she stumbles and fumbles forward, her eyes is beginning to fill up with her own blood. Now she can't see what she's doing, and she has to navigate, blinded by her own blood. As she stumbles around, leaving a trail of blood and fragments of her teeth behind her, she hears something that terrifies her. Someone is trying to break up a screen door. Someone is trying to force his way into the home. The Phantom had made his way to the back door by the kitchen, and if he had gotten inside he would have had direct access to Catherine. But Catherine isn't just a tough lady, she's a very smart one as well. As she hears that the Phantom is by the back door, she first thinks of giving up, leaving a note to her family. But fuck that. She's not gonna die today. She by now had gotten her balance together a little better and decided to run towards the front door, still blinded by her own blood, mind you. Investigators would even state that she had left a virtual river of blood in her tracks. Catherine has now made it outside, and she is drenched in her own blood, her nightgown now sporting the shimmering red color of blood. She darts across the street in her bare feet to her sister's and brother-in-law's house, but they're not home. But Catherine is pretty sharp-minded, considering her predicament, and instantly starts running to her neighbor 50 yards away. Her neighbor answers the door, and she managed to say, "Virgil's dead," before collapsing on his front lawn. Her neighbor, a man named Prater, grabs his rifle and shoots into the air to alarm all the other neighbors in the area. One of the neighbors, a man named Elmer, responds and is quickly told what's going on. Prater, his wife, and his baby, with the help of Elmer, carries Catherine into the car and drives straight to the hospital. She struggles to remain conscious in the car, and she was so dazed by the event that she even yanked out her own gold-filled tooth and gave it to Elmer as compensation for his help. I'm telling you, this lady is fucking impressive. Luckily enough, she would survive the ordeal. Despite losing a huge amount of blood, she showed up in the hospitals without any real dangers of going into shock, and her vitals looked fine. She was rolled into surgery to repair her face that same evening. She had just survived her own true and personal horror movie, never letting the terror paralyze her. Police and investigators arrived to the house, and it was a fucking bloodbath. There was an uneasy feeling in the air amongst the officers. This murder felt similar to the other Phantom attacks, but the MO was different, although the signature was similar. Virgil had been shot twice in the back of his head, and his chair had caught on fire. There's a good reason for this though, as Catherine had given Virgil a heating pad before going to bed. The heating pad had overheated and the chair had caught on fire, but lucky enough the fire hadn't spread. This was the first Phantom attack to take place on the Arkansas side of the border, and the panic in Texarkana reached new heights. It was as if everyone knew the Phantom had done it, but no one. And there was some discrepancies in how he operated. The most obvious one being how he chose his victims, a married couple. And also the location was very different, going from attacking couples in cars to striking Virgil and Catherine in their own home. He also could have been using an automatic rifle instead of a pistol, as only 2 bullet holes was found in the window. Something an automatic rifle could explain, as it would enable 2 shots being fired through the same hole in rapid succession. One hole coming from the 2 bullets that killed Virgil, and the second hole from when he shot Catherine. The police were quick with setting up roadblocks and interviewed several suspects, only 3 of which were interviewed more in depth, but none of them were detained. The Phantom had managed to get by the roadblocks in a car as tire tracks were found near the house. Lucky or just precise, I don't know, but this is what Sheriff Davis had to say about the Phantom. This killer is the luckiest person I have ever known. No one sees him, hears him in time, or can identify him in any way. The Phantom had also left a bloody footprint as well as a flashlight in a nearby hedge, none of which would help police ever solving the crime. The tension had reached a boiling point in Texarkana, and reporters on the night of the murder had had to identify themselves to local people who demanded to see identification, threatening to shoot them, and the tension didn't die down. Guns were sold out and vigilante groups were patrolling at night. Civilians and police tried to lure out the Phantom, setting up decoys, and people constructed traps in their homes. But the Phantom killer would never appear again. He would fall back into the shadows, leaving a trail of bodies behind him in the moonlight of Texarkana. Let me start off this segment with the zodiac theories. I'm not gonna dwell into it in depth as it feels like a fruitless endeavor. These days every killer seems to be connected to the zodiac. I remember rampant rumors of the Golden State Killer being zodiac despite the crystal clear difference in MO and signature. But with the Phantom Killer the MO is similar, targeting young couples on lovers' lanes, shooting them. But if you read into the details of the crimes, there is a difference. Not only that, but the Zodiac was a massive attention whore. Once he got the attention he wanted and the legendary status he sought, he quit. The Phantom Killer feels more personally motivated. He did create terror in Texarkana and stirred up a shitstorm, but that was just collateral damage, and it was probably what made him stop. I really find a connection being made here is a stretch of the imagination, but neither Zodiac nor the Phantom has ever been caught, so it still remains a possibility. As Texarkana started to look more and more like a war zone, with people nailing their windows shut and arming themselves to the extreme, there was many who was desperate for answers and conclusions, something that spawned rumors, and rumors can have a devastating effect on an ongoing investigation. The panic was so gripping that a bar owner had shot a customer in the foot because he was looking for beer. People and even police had to call in advance before going to someone's house, and police had to put on their sirens when approaching or talking to someone. It didn't help that the Texas Ranger assigned to the case fueled the panic, giving statements like that people should oil up their guns and make sure they're loaded. The name given to the killer sure didn't help either. People barricaded themselves and moved in with relatives, taking turns staying up on watch. All this an effect of pure terror. Let me also clarify on the sexual assaults committed by the Phantom. He did sexually assault 3 of his victims, but not in a traditional sense. We have his assault on Mary Jean Larry as a basis here, because that did happen, and he probably assaulted Betty and Polly in the same way, with the barrel of his gun. I don't know what that says about the Phantom, perhaps that he was impotent, or perhaps that he saw his victims as dirty and impure. In total, 400 suspects were questioned during the investigation, and of course there is one suspect that is often viewed as the likeliest, but we'll talk about him later. Before I talk suspects, I would just like to mention a couple discrepancies that the movie based on the case portrays. The movie claims to be 100% true and that only the names was changed. That is 100% fucking bullshit. One of the first things in the movie is a scene where the Phantom goes up to a car with a young couple and just immediately smashes the window and just drags them out. Right there. That never happened. But the biggest myth the movie portrays is that the Phantom would have killed Betty with her own trombone, attaching a sharp object at the end of it, and then binding her to a tree, and proceed to stab her with the sharp object attached to the trombone while playing the instrument at the same time. That is a complete work of fiction. She was shot in the chest and in the face. I get that movies like to use the fad that a story is quote unquote true. It helps marketing, but this movie came out in the 70s and was portrayed in a very documentary fashion, and it spread a lot of disinformation about the case. It just feels kinda unnecessary to make such a claim when you know you've made up most of the movie. The real story is fascinating and horrifying as it is. There is no need to make up a bunch of stuff. One interesting suspect popped up after the double murder on Betty. It was a man trying to sell a saxophone in Corpus Christi, Texas. The man had seemed nervous, and when the girl at the counter asked for the manager, the man fled. The suspicious man was arrested buying a revolver at a pawn shop 2 days later, but the police couldn't find the saxophone. They did, however, find bloody clothes in a bag, but the man claimed the blood was from a bar fight he had gotten into. Police kept poking and prodding and checked out every statement he made. After several days had gone by, the police determined that the man was telling the truth, and he was released, no longer a suspect. In November of 1948, an 18-year-old freshman named Henry Booker Tennyson was found dead in his bed. He had committed suicide and had left notes and clues. In the notes he claimed to have been the Phantom killer, but didn't give any details. His brother could also testify that he had been with Henry during one of the attacks, so he couldn't have been the Phantom. Henry Booker was just a depressed teenager who felt that he was a disappointment to his family. Nothing else. Other suspects considered was a German prisoner of war who was said to have escaped and stolen a car in Mount Ida, Arkansas. Another suspect was an unknown hitchhiker who was picked up by a driver and then proceeded to pull out a gun and tell the driver he had killed 5 people in Texarkana. Big words. On May 10th, 1946, in Atoka, Oklahoma, a man had walked up to a woman's house asking her for food and money. When she told the man she had no food or money, the man dragged her out on the porch and told her he had already killed 3 people and that he was gonna rape and kill her. But he was stopped when he heard someone on a horse gallop by and told her that if she said anything he would kill her. Then he ran away. Police brought a man matching this suspect but concluded that he could not have been in Texarkana at the time of the attacks. Now there is more suspects like this, but I want to go straight for the gravy here. Let's talk about the main man himself, Ewell Swinney. An Arkansas State Police rookie by the name of Max Tackett had discovered that on each night of the murders a car had been stolen. And in June of 1946, Max found a car that had been stolen in a parking lot and staked it out. He saw a 21-year-old woman approach the car and arrested her. She told the officer that her husband had stolen it and that he was in Atlanta, Texas, trying to sell another stolen car. Max contacted police in Atlanta, Texas, and they told him someone had tried to sell one of their citizens a stolen car. Max met with a citizen who said he wouldn't recognize the man, but Max was a sharp detective. He could see that the citizen had a very distinct cowboy look and told him that while he might not recognize the man they're looking for, the man they're looking for will definitely recognize him. They were gonna fish him out. The plan was to walk the citizen through several public places and see if anyone reacted suspiciously, as their suspect surely would want to avoid this man. This paid off in July when Max and the citizen walked into a motor coach bus station and saw men run out of the back of the building. Max chased the man and caught him on the fire escape. The man kept saying they hadn't caught him for just stealing cars, and he also asked if he was gonna get the chair. Max acted dumb and just kept saying that he wouldn't get the death penalty for stealing cars. Other than that, Sweeney wouldn't admit to anything. But his wife told police in detail of how Sweeney was the Phantom and that he had killed Paul and Betty. Although Sweeney's wife was seen as an unreliable witness and she couldn't be made to testify against her husband, couldn't be proven or convicted as the Phantom killer, so he was instead put in jail for car theft. Unfortunately, police only had circumstantial evidence against Sweeney, like that he had stolen a car on the night Paul and Betty died, and that he had told Max when he was arrested that he knew he was arrested for more than stealing cars. When police had told his wife he was being suspected of murder, she had simply said, "How did they find out?" A khaki work shirt was found in his home with the laundry mark Stark that could be seen under black light. Stark, of course, was the last name of the last two victims, Catherine Stark and Virgil Stark. His wife had also told police very detailed information, including things they didn't know, although she recanted her confession later. None of Sweeney's fingerprints could be matched to any fingerprints from the murder scenes, and police didn't believe Sweeney's wife, deducing that the couple would have been in San Antonio on the night of the murder of Betty and Paul. Sweeney never confessed, and police were never convinced that he was the Phantom. The Phantom legend lives on today, and as late as in 1999 and 2000, family members of victims received phone calls from a woman saying she was sorry for what her father had done. Sweeney never had a daughter. And the Phantom that terrorized a small town on the border of Texas and Arkansas in the spring of 1946 never stepped into the moonlight again. He had left the stage forever, reminding the people of Texarkana what the moonlight can bring.
Welcome to the jungle. We've got fun and games. We've got everything you want. Honey, we know the names. We are the people that can find whatever you may need. If you've got no money, honey, we've got your disease in the jungle. Welcome to the jungle. Watch it bring you to your knees. Welcome to the jungle. We take it day by day. If you want it, you're gonna bleed, but it's the price you pay. And you're a very sexy girl, very hard to please. You can taste the bright lights, but you won't get it for free in the jungle. Welcome to the jungle. I wanna watch you leave. Welcome to the jungle. It gets worse every day.
Happy Halloween, and thank you for watching, and good night.
You take it eventually.